Good morning and welcome to the Belong Collective. So glad that you're here with us this morning. My name is Pastor Justin. I'm lead pastor of the Belong Collective, and we're so thankful that you chose to spend your morning with us. A few quick kind of housekeeping things. We have a website, thebelongcollective.org. You can go there to find out more about us. There's an option to give there. You can just learn more about who we are. You can go to our YouTube channel and check out past digital gatherings that we've had and some other content on our YouTube. We also have an Instagram that you can follow and a Facebook page that you can follow to find out more information. On those particular platforms, we also have, for example, on Facebook, a group that you can join where we share prayer requests and updates on life and things that are kind of going on within the Belong Collective. So tons of opportunities to connect. We also, on our website, like I said, we have the option to give, but we also have a connect card there where you can fill out that information and you'll be then added to an email list that we send out every week or a couple of weeks that just keep you updated on what's going on at the Belong Collective. So if you want to get connected deeper, those are some options. I highly encourage you to do that. Also, we are doing t-shirt pre-orders right now, and so if you would want to support the Belong Collective by purchasing a shirt, you can do that at our website as well. Again, thebelongcollective.org. Now, we are in a new year, and I don't know about you, but I'm excited that we're in a new year. 2021 now, putting 2020 in the rearview mirror. And as we start this new year, we're going to do things a little bit different with these digital gatherings, at least for the month of January. So if this isn't something you like, just hold on for 1 month and we're going to get through it, and then maybe it'll be back to normal. We're just going to kind of see how this works, how it engages you. So yes, we would love your feedback. We just want to let you know that right away. Like, if the way we've been doing digital gatherings is exactly like what you need on a Sunday, then please let us know. As we go through this, if this is really helpful, please let us know. But ultimately, what we're going to do for the first month of this new year, as we continue to meet digitally, and this is probably important to say too, we are hopeful that as we get through winter, that maybe we can go back to outdoor gatherings, and hopefully as we continue to prayerfully hope that this vaccine is going to make a difference, and that ultimately we're going to be coming out of this pandemic in the first portion of this year, that we would be able to get back to meeting again in person, even indoors. But we want to do that, and we're committed to doing that as long as it's safe, and it just currently isn't. And so for right now, we're going to continue to meet digitally, and this is kind of how we're going to do it for this month. For this month, what's going to happen is it's just going to be a teaching portion on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. And so there's not going to be music. There's not going to be kind of the extra stuff. It's just going to be me and you on through the month of January, okay? What we are also going to do is throughout the week, we're going to post songs so you can connect. It's also an opportunity for you to connect midweek. So we're going to share songs from some of our talented musicians onto our Instagram, our Facebook, and we'll even probably tag those in emails as we send them through the week so that you who maybe aren't on social media platforms can participate in those, can connect with those. So they'll be on our YouTube, they'll be on our Facebook, and they'll be on our Instagram. And again, we'll probably post like 3 songs a week or something like that. So you'll be able to connect with music during the week, but on Sunday, during this hour for at least this month, we're just going to have the teaching. And part of that is because it does take a lot of time to produce everything we do here, and the year of 2020 has taught me a lot, as I'm kind of the main producer of putting all the content together and doing all that. This also allows, if you remember back in November, we shot in Indian Echo Caverns with many of our worship artists, and so like we were able to go down there, record for multiple hours, and then take that content and break it into pieces and then put it together. What we're going to try to do in the month of January is to do that again with our musicians, is to find a spot where we can safely meet, where we can gather in kind of sections, have people take like a 30-minute window or an hour-long window, come in, have the time to record, and then take that content after we capture it and bring it here to the digital gathering. And so this opportunity for January to be formatted this way gives us the ability to then prioritize spending some time capturing some more content for the months of February and March, and who knows, maybe beyond. Hopefully not, but potentially. So I just want to encourage you, hopefully this is something that you can be patient with if this isn't the format that you necessarily prefer, but also hopefully you can engage midweek. Who knows what, it might be really encouraging to connect with some of those songs in the midweek format instead of in this particular format. So and we do appreciate your feedback. So if you have ideas for the digital gatherings, if you have things that you're like, hey, have you guys tried or considered this, or is there a limitation for doing something like this, please reach out to me, justin@thebelongcollective.org. I would love to answer your questions or hear your ideas and consider whether or not that's something that we can consider putting into place, putting into practice. We are just doing our best amid this to continue to connect with you in this digital way. And we're so thankful for the ways you have connected through the year of 2020. And as we head into 2021, we know you're going to keep connecting, and hopefully soon we'll be able to connect in person. Now, we are launching a series today titled Reset. And the best way to probably describe this series is to share an illustration that I'm very fond of. On New Year's Day in 1929, there was a football game that was played. It was Georgia Tech playing California, and it was the Rose Bowl. And so many of us, maybe college football is something you've been watching over this last week, but this is kind of bowl season, or it's a little bit of a different bowl season than typical. But even back in 1929, there was a Rose Bowl. It was bowl season then as well, and so Georgia Tech and California were playing together, playing against each other, and one of the offensive linemen for California named Roy Regal recovered a fumble. He was the center offensive lineman. He recovered a fumble, and he came out of the pile with the ball and took off toward the end zone. And the crowd is roaring. And I don't know if you've ever played sports, but those moments where you're doing something that's not expected, where it's like, wow, I'm contributing in a way that was not expected. I don't know how much you know about the center in football or how much you know about football, but the center is the one who hikes the ball to the quarterback. And pretty much the center's job is to hike the ball and then block the person that's in front of him. And that's pretty much it. Now, you could get into the complications. Centers are a very complicated position in the sense that you could pull the center and you can go out and block. But ultimately, the center should rarely ever have the ball in their hand running down the field. Not really part of the job description. But here he finds himself taking off down the field. The crowd is roaring. And so, the adrenaline must be so much. And he's running and running. And again, centers are also big guys. They're not technically, really supposed to be running down the field. He's running down the field. 65 yards he runs until he gets to the 2-yard line. And on the 2-yard line, he's tackled. But here's the crazy thing. He's tackled by his own teammate. Actually, his quarterback. Because he was running the wrong way. Yes, he was running the wrong direction. So I want you to think about that, 65 yards the wrong way, only to be tackled by your quarterback just before you scored a touchdown for the other team. And this is on the biggest stage of your college career. And he went the wrong way. So I think the question for us, have you ever found yourself on the wrong path? Have you ever found yourself going the wrong direction? I know when it comes to faith, when it comes to my beliefs, my spiritual experience even, I can say that there have been times where I've found myself going the wrong direction. Maybe believing the wrong things, thinking the wrong things, acting the wrong way out of my faith or out of my belief. And it can be shameful to confront that. It can be hard to be like, wow, I'm just now realizing I've been going the wrong way this whole time. And maybe there was the roar of the crowd and you just assumed they were in support of you. And then ultimately you find out, you get to the 2-yard line and it was like the other team screaming for you or your own team screaming, stop. And I just think of this analogy as, for many of us, we haven't maybe taken the time to kind of reset and go back to the start. And I wonder if this center were to reset and go back to the start and realize that when he picked up this fumble, he came out of the pile all disoriented and just took off and started sprinting a particular direction. And ultimately, while that was the direction he was going, he was directionless in what his objective was. And so for many of us as followers of Jesus, we have a desire to follow, to look like Jesus, to grow into what it means to be followers of Jesus. Yet, we also have a starting point that may have really helped us and guided us. And it may have even given us all the tools we needed for that particular season. But have we gone back and considered, like, what was handed to us that was helpful, that we need to hold on to? And what maybe do we need to consider saying, that's not going to help me go the direction I need to go? I need to maybe consider how I need to orient myself differently. And so through this series, Reset, we're going to just go back and look at some major themes from the character of God to the Bible to just general theology, which just is the study of God. And so topical kind of we might jump into. Ultimately, like, the goal here is for us to just go back and re-examine some popular things that maybe the church throughout history has gotten wrong, and maybe you've been handed some things in this that might need reshaping, or it might even just be that, like, oh, I've never heard it said that way. That's actually helpful for me to think of it that way instead of this way. And so what we're going to do in this series is just say, let's all commit to hitting the reset button, going back to the start, and kind of back to the starting line, and let's move from there and just look and examine some of these core foundational things within our beliefs that we can, at the very least through this series, shore up, grow in deeper even, and become even more focused on, like, the direction I'm going in my thoughts and in my beliefs and in my spiritual life is the right direction. It is the way in which I'm going to be made to look more and more like Jesus, which is ultimately our goal. And so today we start with the Bible. And I don't know about your relationship with the Bible. My earliest memories of growing up in the church, I did grow up in the church, of the Bible are kind of two things that initially pop into my mind. And so any of you who are like old school evangelicals who have been in the church for a long time are going to maybe remember Salty the Songbook, Salty the Singing Songbook. Maybe you remember. It was like the pre-VeggieTales. You can Google it and watch it. But I watched those VHS tapes all the time. It was just part of the Douglas household growing up. And so I remember that, fond memories of that. I also remember Awana. Maybe some of you remember what Awana was, or maybe some of you are still participating in Awana. It's a thing that still exists. It was kind of like Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts for the church for a while there, and it was really popular when I was a kid. And if you could memorize scripture, you would get points, and then those points would get you canteen. The points would transition to the canteen to where you could get candy and toys and things like that. And so, of course, me being the young entrepreneur, I'm getting all these points. So I'm coming in with all the scriptures memorized. There's scripture that I have in this head that I don't even know where it's from. It'll just pop in and I'll recite it. Full, 2 sentences, 3 sentences, and then I'll type it in Google and I'll be like, oh, well, there's where that is. Because I just know it's up there because it was up there as an 8-year-old when I was memorizing, for a fun-sized Snickers bar. So that's my relationship with the Bible at a very young age. And then throughout my life, I was being raised in the church, and so I was coming to find the Bible to be this book that we believed in and that was true and inerrant and infallible. And these are words that we'll talk about, maybe not today, but throughout as we talk through the Bible. And so I was being taught these things, and I was seeing the value of the Bible not only as a tool to live by and to organize my life by, but ultimately like this sacred text that is holy and pure and good, and all these different things that were handed to me about what the Bible is. Then going to college and actually, having 2 degrees in studying the Bible, I started to begin to realize, wow, this is way more complex than what I was handed back here. Parts of what I was handed are helpful and true and good, but parts of what I was handed aren't really working for what I'm learning as I really unpack and uncover what the Bible is. And so my guess would be that we've all had a different encounter with the Bible. Whether you never had any formal training in the Bible, whether you've had multiple degrees in the Bible, we've all probably had things we've learned about the Bible that we've had to unlearn, and we've all probably had things we've learned about the Bible that have like illuminated it for us and really helped us. And I even just popped in my head now. There was a season where I was going through a class on textual criticisms of the Bible where I didn't know if the Bible, like I really was coming to the conclusion in that, like, I was having a crisis of faith and a crisis of even like my belief in the Bible just through that class, which ironically was supposed to shore up my faith in the Bible, but did a lot to expose how I was handed a very fundamental view of the Bible. It's either all true or it's all false. There is no in between. You either buy into the whole thing and you take it all, and it's all God's word and it's all infallible and there's nothing wrong with it. It's without error, or all of it's with error, and none of, like, this kind of dualistic approach to how we hold the Bible. And that's what I was handed when I was growing up. And so, and when I was just even navigating undergrad, and then as I went into graduate school and began to kind of see some of the complexities with that, I had a crisis of conscience where like 6 weeks I was teaching the Bible from a pulpit and I didn't even know if I believed in the Bible. And so even if you're there, even if you're listening to this right now and you're like, Justin, I don't even know what I think about the Bible, just know that I've been there and I get it. And I'll share a little more about kind of what brought me back probably through this series. But let's start here, as we will probably spend a few weeks on the Bible, because I think it's really important that we at least kind of get an overview of the Bible. I've got this cool little whiteboard behind me. You're unfortunately going to see my handwriting, which is awful. But just so you kind of know, this is going to be a little more of like a teaching type series. Not that that's going to be too different. My style is more kind of teaching anyway, but it is maybe going to come off, I don't want to say professorial, I'm standing here in a hoodie, but I guess I'm just saying, like, I hope that you would learn something through this. That's kind of the hope through this series. So let's begin here. What is the Bible? So we'll just write here, I'm already struggling with my handwriting. What is the Bible? Now, if you ask 5 followers of Jesus that question, you're probably going to get 5 different answers. And so I could probably delineate that question to an easy to remember sentence, but it would not be enough because there's a lot of different ways that people would probably break that down, kind of things that they would focus on that others might not focus on. And so what we're going to do is just really break it down in its basics. The Bible we'll begin with this. The Bible is a collection of books. So there are multiple books of the Bible. So, and we have those books broke down into 2 sections. So you have we'll just do this, the Old Testament, and you have the New Testament. And so these sacred texts that are in both categories, the Old Testament and the New Testament. And now let's kind of break down what that looks like. And so you have the Torah for the Old Testament. This is the first 5 books of the Bible. Some would call it the Pentateuch. And so this is kind of, we'll break this down into sections of the text. And then you have your historical books. You have your historical books. Then you have your wisdom literature. Then you have your prophetic literature. And look, everyone kind of has a different way of breaking these down. This is the pretty general way of breaking it down. You can definitely get into the weeds and break down even more than this, but ultimately when you're thinking about like your historical literature, you're thinking about 1st and 2nd Kings, you're thinking about Chronicles, you're thinking about the books that are really breaking down the history of the Jewish people. When you're thinking about the Torah, this is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. This is also very historic, but so it kind of falls into, they're similar in that regard. But there is also poetry in the Torah as well. You have the first chapter of Genesis, the first chapter of the Bible is probably more poetic. Not probably, it is more poetic than it is historical. We can take it as history if we want to, but it's written in poetic form and in nature. And then when we get to like the wisdom literature, we're looking at things like the Psalms, the Proverbs, Song of Solomon. Then when we get into the prophets, we're talking about Hosea, for example, Isaiah. So we have all different kinds of literature. This is really important because one of the things I want to get back to is this word over here that I think is really important. And I'm just going to write it here, and I'm going to leave it here for a minute, and we'll talk about this later, okay? But as we break down these different types of the Old Testament, I think it's just important to recognize that there's a lot of diversity in the literature of the Old Testament. It is not one particular way of writing, one particular style of writing, one particular way of communicating truth. There is all different ways being expressed. And so God's expressiveness in communicating here takes on a lot of variety. So then we get to the New Testament. And so the New Testament, we have the Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. We have the Acts of the Apostles. And then we have the epistles or the letters. I'm going to be honest with you. My biggest fear right now is misspelling something. So just go ahead and type in the comments if I misspell something. Go ahead right now. Just get it out of your system if you see something, because it's probably going to be misspelled. And this is the one that I'll probably misspell. You have your apocalyptic, oh my gosh, I'm pretty sure I spelled it wrong, but whatever. Apocalyptic, yes, I missed the Y. That's what I missed. Okay, you have your apocalyptic literature, Revelation, which is actually very interesting. It's Jewish apocalyptic literature. It's the only of its kind in the Bible. So again, we have a diversity of writings. So the Gospels are more kind of these stories of Jesus. The Acts, this is the apostles following Jesus, kind of, historical, and as is the gospel, their stories following Jesus and how the early church was being formed. Then you have the epistles, the letters. These are letters to different churches and from people to other people. And so it would be like you having a pen pal for years and years and writing multiple letters to them, and then us getting the chance to now read those letters and kind of glean wisdom from what was written and what was encouraged and what was challenged in those letters. And then you have this apocalyptic literature, which, by the way, again, like I said earlier, is its own thing. It's a very unique, we did a whole series way back on Revelation. We should probably do it again, but it's just a very unique style. And so we see in the Old Testament and in the New Testament this reality that there is, stylistically speaking, so much going on here. To just say, do you believe the Bible? That's a really easy thing to just, yes. Well, what do you mean, do I believe the Bible? There's so much different going on here, or to break down the Bible into this really just simple thing. It is pretty complicated in the sense that it's bringing forth a lot of different ways of engagement. You engage a poem different than you engage history. A poem is meant to make you feel something, not meant to necessarily give you a particular truth. Yet, as you feel something, you can experience truth as you feel that. History might be something that's meant to convey, here's exactly what happened in this particular thing at this particular time with this particular person. But then it becomes a question of what is this history pointing to? Is this pointing to how God would have us live our life, the way the historian records this happening? Or is this pointing to, hey, here's what happens when you don't follow God. Here's what happens when you live a life of selfishness. And sometimes people take historical, biblical stories, they take them, they manipulate them into hey, this is what the people of God did at this time, so this is what we should do. And you're well, that's kind of what they got judged for in the next chapter. And so you begin to see how easy it is for people to cherry pick the Bible and make it be what they want it to be, because there's so much different types of literature that it requires the context first and foremost for us to say when we engage anything in Scripture, anything at all, to say, what type of literature is this? Because there is so much different going on in the Bible. Now, another way of breaking down and understanding the overarching kind of way of the Bible, or the story of the Bible, because I find that this isn't really very helpful if I'm like, okay, so start at the Torah, then read the historical, then read the wisdom, then read the prophets, then read the Gospels, then Acts, then epistles, and then apocalyptic, and you're good. Like, the Bible is, first of all, not written in chronological order, and so that can be really confusing right off the bat when you're like, I thought I read this back there already, and now I'm reading it again. So there are such things as chronological Bibles, which can be helpful for some people to pick up a chronological Bible, read it that way, to where you get a little bit more of that. But what is probably better to at least understand about what's taking place in the Bible is the covenants of the Bible. And so covenants are God's relationship with his creation. And so there are major covenants, which I think are a better way maybe, or I don't know if I want to say better, another way of understanding kind of the meta-narrative of the Bible. And so, for the covenants, that we have the Edenic Covenant. So this is the Garden of Eden. This is the covenant God makes with Adam in the Garden of Eden. And then following that, we have the Noahic Covenant. And by the way, there was far more covenants than what I'm going to list here. I'm kind of just listing the major covenants. So this is the covenant God makes with Noah following the flood. And then you have the Abrahamic Covenant. Okay, and then so you have God's blessing to Abraham that he'll make his descendants more numerous than the stars. And then you have the Mosaic Covenant. This is the covenant of Moses as he frees his people, as we were in that series on Exodus, which at some point we will get back to. We kind of went halfway through that, and then we need to finish the rest of it. We'll get back to it at some point if you still are waiting for the finishing of that series. So we have the Edenic, Noahic, Abrahamic, Mosaic, and we're not even out of the Torah, by the way. Okay, so we're still in the Torah here, and we have all of these covenants God has made with his people. And then we get to the Davidic Covenant. And again, there's covenants in between here, there's covenants after this, but these are kind of what I guess I would say are the 6 major covenants. Now, finally, when we get to the New Testament, we have the Messianic Covenant. So, Messianic Covenant. Now, so that would be the covenant that the Messiah makes, that Jesus makes. And so with mankind. And so we have this covenant with Jesus. So the reason these are important to recognize is that each covenant is made with God saying, I will do this if you do this, or if you do this, I will do this, or even if you don't do this, I'm going to do this. I'm going to bless you, or I'm going to, think of it as a contract. I mean, it's hard to say that because I don't know that that's necessarily God's nature, is to be contractual, but God is encouraging his people to live a particular way, and he's expressing his desire to bless them as they live that way. Now, it begins with the Edenic Covenant, and based on the story, as we know, that doesn't last but a couple chapters, and we have Adam and Eve not holding, up to the covenant and suffering the full consequences of that reality. And then the Noahic Covenant, we move to the Abrahamic Covenant, the Mosaic Covenant, the Davidic Covenant. This is the kings here. We're seeing God's relationship with the kings. So you just see this consistent shifting of new covenant after new covenant after new covenant. And it's really this image that or what some people would say, it's this image that God had to come to earth in the form of Jesus from the standpoint of needing to reconcile humanity to himself, because all of these covenants were not working. It wasn't providing the fulfillment needed for mankind. And so ultimately Jesus comes, and this is the fulfillment of the covenants. And so with each of these covenants, though, it's important to recognize when you're wow, why would God be so harsh to say that? Or why would the scriptures emphasize that particular portion of either God's character, or why would that happen? Why would this happen? And then when you go and you say, oh, that was during the Abrahamic Covenant when God said this to Abraham, and if he responded this way, this would be ultimately what would happen, or things like that. And so it can be helpful for us as we go through scripture and find different things to say, you know what? the covenant that happened under actually really matters. It actually can make a huge difference in like the context for what we're reading. Because again, this is what I really want to emphasize today. Today, as we think about what the Bible is, I just really want to emphasize context matters. And ultimately, context matters because it's probably more complicated than the person who hands you the easy answer. And here's the deal. As an 8-year-old, this was not stuff I was going to understand. I'm not teaching my kids right now, so there's the Torah, there's what, look, it needed to be simple for me at an early age. But there's also the reality that like there also needs to be some mystery thrown into this. There needs to be also some diligence to say, I want to accept that this is a complex like question when we say, what's the context of that passage? Well, that requires a lot of work because the next thing we have to consider is the language. So when we talk about language, we have two sections here, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is written in Hebrew. The New Testament is written in Greek. So, there's a reason we have multiple translations of Bibles, for example, and that is because Hebrew, you might translate it different. A word does not have a one-for-one to English. And I mean, if you're here and you're hearing this for the first time, just a quick news flash, because some people don't know this or they act like it's not a thing, but the Bible was not written in English. The Bible was written in Hebrew, the Old Testament, and the New Testament was written in Greek. And so the complexity of how these particular words transition into English, it's actually rather complex how we get our words and the disagreement and differences of thought on what a particular writer is conveying. Because, for example, in Greek, we have multiple words for love. There's different types of love. You have phileo, which is brotherly love. And this is where we get Philadelphia from. And I'm doing this off memory right now. You have agape, which is this idea of unconditional love, a love that has no condition applied to it. This is a love that we consistently hear comes from God toward us. And then you have a love called eros, okay? Eros is an erotic love. Okay, so I just listed 3 different words that if you translated each of them love and failed to contextualize it for what the author was actually addressing, you may miss the whole thing. You may miss it if you describe brotherly love as eros. That's not what the author's talking about when he uses the word eros, right? So you have to take a little bit of liberty to say, okay, the best translation for this is love. That's what we've seen, how we've seen it translate throughout, but it's really as English continues to evolve, because all languages are evolving, are being made new every few years, being updated, different slang meanings to terms, different terms becoming outdated, different new terms being adopted, and all of that, it makes Hebrew and Greek, these ancient languages, difficult to then translate particularly perfectly, let's put it that way, into English. And so we also have to recognize, again, when we get to context, because this is all a matter of context right now. That's really what I want to emphasize. We have to ask, what type of literature is it? Where does it fall in here? What covenant is it happening under? What language is it? And what is the root word of that language? Like, what is the root word of the passage that I'm reading? Is it even translated right? For example, there's a great documentary being done by a friend of mine called 1946, where they recognize that in this year, a particular Bible translation adopted the word homosexual into the Bible. It had never been used before 1946, but they chose to use that particular terminology for a Greek word, and it had never been used before. And then it got widely adopted by almost every translation. And in that, it has created all kinds of problems for how we view that word in the Greek that did not exist prior. And ultimately, the author of this documentary would say, like, it's made the church more homophobic and bigoted than it probably would have been had this decision by this group of translators not been made. And so now, maybe that word made a huge difference, maybe it didn't, I don't know. But ultimately what I'm trying to say is we have to be responsible in how we come to the words of the scripture because they weren't written in English. And so we have to consider, what are some other ways that this might have been translated? What are some other words that might have been used? Instead of pulling out one verse, let me get the broader context of the paragraph and say, what's the author trying to communicate here in this, instead of just pulling out one piece and saying, I'm going to apply that to my life. That's my life verse, maybe. And look, I'm not against having the life verse. I'm just saying, know the context of your life verse. And then if it's Jeremiah 29:11, it might not be for you. Sorry. Okay, moving on. Flat. I just threw this word out here, flat, and this will be kind of where we close today. Many of us read the Bible as a flat book, and this is where I kind of touched on earlier with do you believe in the Bible? We see it as like this flat book where everything is equal. Everything has the same footing. But when we look at the Bible, we see that there's a story and a story arc to all of these. The meta-narrative is that it's all pointing to Jesus. It's all pointing to this gospel story, to this Messianic Covenant. And when we read this particular portion, let's just say the history of the Old Testament, and we hold it on par with the story of Jesus and what that means to our faith, and we take from that things that might even be counter what Jesus was for, we say, wow, that isn't really the way we're supposed to engage these ancient texts. We're supposed to, as followers of Jesus, if that is who you are as you're watching this, which I recognize maybe that might not be you, and if that's not you, I'm not talking to you, but I'm talking to you if you would consider yourself a follower of Jesus. The red letters of Jesus matter contextually so much more to our faith than the Old Testament necessarily. Now, some of you, red flags are going off, all sirens are going off in your head because you have been taught your whole life, and this is where hopefully we're resetting, going back to the starting line, and don't take my word for it, do your own study, do your own thinking. But to say that when we read some Old Testament, let's say Leviticus literature, that we hold that on par with the words of Jesus, it's not placing it in its proper context. We understand this as part of what got us to Jesus. But this is not where we want to go back to. I would never pull a passage from Leviticus and be like, let's do that, unless I also saw that in Jesus. And that's really important, that there are things Jesus is affirming about this. Actually, a lot that Jesus is affirming about this. There's also a lot that he calls into question. You've heard it said. Like, go read the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is constantly saying, you've heard it said, and he's literally reading an Old Testament passage and then saying, but I tell you. You've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your neighbor and pray for those who persecute you. Jesus is calling into question some of these passages, some of these places where people have come to a mindset that is different from the mindset and belief and ultimately the life calling that Jesus is calling his disciples to. And so if we consider ourselves disciples of Jesus, we cannot read the Bible as a flat book. We have to apply context. We have to apply color to this. This is not black and white. This requires us to do some work. It requires us to say, wow, this is more complicated than the easy answer of, it's just inerrant, it's infallible. Hey, just take the Bible for what it says. And, that's just what you got to do. Well, yeah, but you also have to do the hard work of determining the context it was written in, the type of book it is. Is it a poem? Is it history? Is it being written to a particular person dealing with a particular issue? What covenant is it under? What's God's relationship to his people in that time? What language was it written in? And what are the words that are used in that language for that particular passage? And were they translated accurately? What are other translations of that? I hope what you found out today, and maybe you're even scratching your head this morning, and I'm sorry if I gave you a headache, but or confused you. But ultimately, my hope is that you realize the Bible is incredibly colorful. And I just want to go back to a story I shared earlier about myself. I remember how terrifying it was teaching the Bible for 6 weeks where I didn't know if I believed it. I was actually a pastor in Wisconsin at that time, and I had entered into an interim lead pastor position. And so I was kind of in this like trial period of being a lead pastor. And I was like, wow, I'm failing at this if I'm just, a few months into this and I don't even know if I believe the Bible's true anymore. I just want to say what brought me back was this understanding that like, the Bible is generally reliable. And we'll talk a little more about this maybe through this series. And I would encourage you to even send your questions. Like if you have particular questions about the Bible, I would love to shape some of this teaching even around your questions. But I came to the conclusion that like even with some of the problems that exist within the textual criticisms of the Bible is generally reliable. And the life of Jesus is a life that I feel like is the way in which I should live. If I can look like Jesus, if I can embody the fruits of the Spirit, this is the direction I want to go. And the Bible points me in that direction as long as I'm reading it in proper context, as long as I'm applying that context to the passages of Scripture. And so my hope is that you can apply context. Now, as we go back to the starting line, as we kind of hit the reset button, we opened with a little bit of a story about this football player, Roy Regal. And Roy went into the locker room at halftime because that had happened right before halftime. And everyone was sitting on the benches in the floor in the locker room, and they were sitting on the benches of the floor, and they were huddled together just waiting for the coach to come into the room. And Roy had a towel over his shoulders and over his head, and he was in the corner crying. Now, I just want you to think about a center. Most centers are like 300 pounds. I don't know if in the 1929 they were necessarily 300 pounds, but they're big guys. They're physical guys. They're not guys who go to the corner and cry. And the coach came into the locker room, and he was quieter than he usually was. And everyone knew what was going on in that locker room, who was in the stadium. And they were sure he was going to pull Roy for the mistake he made, like pull him from being the center and put the backup in. And after some time and some discussion, the clock keeper came in and said, we have 3 minutes until we need to take the field for the second half. And coach responded to everyone. Everyone's in their same positions as the first half. Head back out to the field. And then Roy kind of stayed in the corner crying, and he said, Roy, didn't you hear me? Same team for the second half. Get out there. And he said, Coach, I can't do it to save my life. Like he said, I've ruined you. I've ruined the University of California. I've ruined myself. I couldn't face the crowd or the stadium to save my life. And Coach Price put his arm around Roy, and he said, Roy, get up and get back. The game is only half over. The game is only half over. I know as I encountered new thinking, the feeling of being a pastor who maybe went the wrong direction on a belief system or on a theology for so long and had to course correct, it's humbling, it's challenging, it's difficult, you do want to go sit in a corner and cry sometimes instead of going back out and playing the game. Like, it's hard to reset and go back. But I just want to encourage you, if you've ever felt like the church did you wrong, or that you were duped, or that you were made to believe something that ultimately you've come to realize, wow, that is an oversimplification, or that is just downright wrong. Because the truth is like, so many people come to so many different conclusions about the Bible. And some of those conclusions are just downright wrong. Like, I just want to say it. They're just wrong. And maybe you were handed that and you ran and ran and ran with that ball in your hand and thought you were going to score a touchdown, and then realized, oh my goodness, I've been going the wrong way. And I've been celebrating going the wrong way for a long time. And I just want to say to you, if you feel defeated by going the wrong way, for a long time on any number of beliefs or theologies or ideas about God, it's not over. You can start fresh. You can reset. And what better time than, this close to a new year to just say, I want to re-examine my faith. I want to be open to the idea that hitting the reset button is an okay thing. It's okay to re-examine. It's okay to start over. I'm not a failure. I don't have anything to be ashamed of, because the beautiful thing about the story of God, about this collection of books that we're referencing, is that there's multiple people who had it wrong and ran the ball for a long time the wrong direction. And so you're not alone. Even as you examine the Bible, you are not alone in that. And so my prayer for you is that you would enter onto the field for that second half. Don't be afraid to keep going. Don't be afraid to say, this past reality that I experienced and how I experienced God does not need to be the reality. That direction that I went back there does not need to continue to be the direction I go in the future. Let me pray for you, and then we will call it a day. Good and gracious God, we thank you for these holy scriptures, these sacred books, these poems and historical documents, letters, however we describe these collection of books. We thank you that ultimately they're pointing us to Jesus. They're pointing us to the way we're called to live and love in this world. May we take the time to not come up with simple answers for the text, but instead to do the digging, to consider the context, and ultimately to grow to look more like you as we engage these scriptures. God, may we do this in community, never alone. May we lean on one another. May we seek resources that maybe even are different from us, believe different than us. And ultimately, may your Spirit guide us. And whatever we believe about the Bible, God, what's most important is that we're shaped to look more like Jesus. So may we love our neighbor. May we have the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control, faithfulness, God. May we order our lives around those characteristics. And as we do that, the Bible will be what the Bible is. But as we look like Jesus, that's going to inform our life. So remind us of the order here of things, and draw us closer to you even as we reset, as we renew, as we go to the starting line and consider our direction. God, we just pray that through this series you might allow some of us to get either back on the right track or go in the right direction, or maybe even this series might tackle someone at the 2-yard line. Whatever it is, God, we just pray that you would be moving through this series and just encouraging us and drawing us closer to you. In the name of Jesus, amen. Have a blessed rest of your week, and we will see you next Sunday at 10 a.m.